Slides on the ukulele are a convenient way to get around the fretboard when you can go from one note and you slide to the next note without ever lifting up your finger. So it sounds like this. So anytime my finger is staying on the same string and not lifting up, I'm just moving from one place to the next, that's a slide. There's several different variations, but the general idea is the same. And it's a good thing to know how to do. It's often misunderstood and it's kind of hard to play if you don't know the trick. So the trick is with the slide, you only have one pick attack. So if I'm picking with my thumb, I'm only going to play the string one time. And I make my motion. Watch my thumb. I don't pick again. So I'm using the leftover kind of volume and sustain from that note that my thumb is creating at first. I'm using that and kind of smearing it into the next note and keeping my finger held down the whole time. The hard thing with a slide is that you're trying to maintain the sustain across several notes. Because as I play this slide, I'm going from the 3rd fret to the 5th fret. When I do that, I'm also playing the 4th fret in between. So I'm actually playing the 3rd fret, the 4th fret, and the 5th fret. It just happens quickly, so your ear kind of just moves it together into one articulation of the sound. But what's happening is you're playing 3rd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret. And you want to be able to get them all to sound clean. So what happens when you're doing this and you're sliding is if I'm making that slide motion, you can try this yourself, is you pretend you're fretting a note and then you slide your finger up. What happens is you get more space between your finger and your thumb, right? So a lot of times what this ends up doing is it releases the pressure on the neck, the downwards pressure as you're moving. So a lot of times what happens is somebody will slide and they'll go, and they kind of lose it. It kind of disappears and fades out as they move up the slide. And what you need to do is be able to counteract that fade by correcting your technique and correcting your motion. So what you're going to do instead is you pick the first note, and as you slide, you're kind of adding some more pressure into the new locations that your finger is, right? So you're trying to like create a gradient in your finger pressure, basically. Because if you play here and keep your thumb in the same place and then play here, you want to be able to, you kind of feel what the difference is between those. You need to be able to maintain that same feel and merge them together so they kind of connect and bridge that gap. The fingering pressure, not necessarily the slide, because that's, the end goal, but in order to technically make it happen with your hand, you have to bridge that gap and create appropriate finger pressure. So as your thumb and your finger separate, as you make the sliding motion, you have to apply even pressure across. Okay, and a good way to practice this is just like I was doing before, is you start on your start note, you pick, and you move your finger to each fret. And eventually you just get it to the point where it's one motion, but you can slowly divide that slide up into different pieces so that you hear whether or not you are adequately pressing down on the string at any of those given stop points, those notes that are between the slide. Okay, so if you need a little bit of inspiration, let's try playing through a couple of different slides, and I'll give you some examples. So you can start by going from the 5th fret to the 7th fret, just with your index finger. Doing this with your index finger is going to be easiest at first. I recommend you start with that, and then you can graduate to using different fingers. But if you go 5th fret to 7th fret, it's going to feel a little different because the amount you're moving has changed, and you're in a different place on the fretboard. So anytime you move around, things are going to feel a little bit different. You're going to have to adjust slightly, and this is just practice. But you go 5th fret to 7th fret, pick once, slide. And you increase that pressure just a little bit. You don't want to like really push into it, because then you're hurting your finger and you're getting a lot of friction as your finger slides on the string. You just want to maintain the pressure that you have. You don't want to lose any. If you back off as you go through the slide, then you have a problem. Then you're going to lose your momentum and your sound. But just retain that pressure as you move and learn to just move it into the new area where you're playing. So the thing that I see a lot of people try and do is you pick and then you pick again. And I believe this is known as a shift slide. I don't really think of it as such because to me it's just a slide and then you pick again, right? It's like two separate different things. But a lot of times you'll see this notated slightly differently, and it's a shift slide. So you pick the first note and then you pick the second note again once you get there. But this is not normally how you're gonna play the slide. The slide itself is just the motion with one pick at the beginning. One attack, you pick and you slide. That's it. I don't hit the note again, but you can. That's a different style, different kind of thing. But for the most part, when you're practicing, just getting that main slide motion is the most important thing, and you're not going to attack again. Here's another one. 3rd fret to 5th fret on the E string. One pick, slide, adjust the pressure. Okay, and then the same is true when you slide downwards. It's going to be the same idea, but in this case, the distance that you're sliding, the motion might change a little bit so that instead of your thumb and your finger moving this way, a lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to move this way a little bit, right? You're going to reverse the rolls. So if we go back, if we're here, 3rd fret to 5th fret, you can either practice sliding upwards so that your thumb is already in this position, which might make it easier for you because you're gonna squeeze back, kind of squeeze back to the first note. And again, you have to kind of feel where the pressure is gonna be to get that adequate coverage and a clear note all the way through. Something to be aware of is that if you're crossing your fingers like this, you have to kind of move your hand a little bit differently to unlock it, because if you try and keep your normal position and keep your thumb stuck on the back, you know, your hand doesn't really move this way too well. You're not going to end up going this way. It's a lot easier to reach this way. You have a lot more range of motion. So a lot of times what you're going to do is you have to kind of open up your hand so that you use the whole, like your whole hand's worth of grip to make that motion. Another one that you can do is you can slide up and down on the same pick attack. So we're gonna just play the 3rd fret, slide to the 5th fret, and then you slide back to the 3rd fret. And the longer you let it ring out, like I'm just trying to demonstrate it here, so I'm playing this slowly, but the longer you let it ring, the more the note is going to fade. There's gonna be less sustain. And what you wanna try and do is try and make that sustain last over the course of your notes. So you're not gonna play a slide, on ukulele at least, you're not going to play a slide where you go. I mean, you can, but that last slide is just kind of like a ghost note. There's not much of it left there. If you're playing electric guitar or whatever, you have a lot more sustain, and a lot of times that'll last, and you can do that. But for the ukulele, in this case, it's just, you know, you want to usually make your slides happen quickly so that you can feel like it's actually working, so you can actually hear the notes. So 3rd fret, 5th fret, you're keeping that steady pressure as you move up and down. Another good one, 2nd fret to the 4th fret on the C string, pick once. You can also go downwards, 4th fret to the 2nd fret. Okay, and what you're gonna end up doing as you get better is you're probably gonna end up, depending on your ukulele and how you play and just the way that you feel things, you're probably gonna end up sliding your thumb a little bit sometimes, not always. A lot of times if you're going up, the thumb will stay the same, but if you're sliding downwards, the thumb will come with, because like I said before, this movement and staying in position is not very ergonomic. It's hard to do. So a lot of times what you'll do instead is your thumb will move along with. So you slide the thumb along with. This is tricky though, because if you don't squeeze enough, you're gonna lose your note. But if you squeeze too much, your thumb's not gonna wanna move and you're gonna get stuck. So this is a lot of just trying it out and practicing, and there's no wrong way to practice slides. If you just play a bunch of them, it doesn't have to be musical. It can just be, you know, trying it out, trying the technique and practicing. And you just pick some random frets and practice sliding. When you start going longer distances with your slides, like for instance, a stylistic thing a lot of times is you'll slide So I'm sliding on the E string here from the 3rd fret to the 8th fret. And that's kind of a long ways, and you have to, in this case, I'm sliding my thumb because I can't reach that far, right? That's silly. That takes me out of position. So my thumb's gonna slide with. So I have to get the right pressure, so I'm not squeezing enough that I stick my thumb. I'm not squeezing enough that I'm hurting my finger with friction, but I'm also keeping even pressure. That's the thing with ukuleles. A lot of times you don't have to press as hard as you think if you're efficient with your motions, right? Like you could have, however, I could fling a marble with this rubber band. I could zap a marble at somebody, and it probably wouldn't hurt that much because this is a lightweight little rubber band. Provided that you're just right there. Maybe not a glass marble, maybe like a plastic marble or something. I don't know. I'm just making this up as I go. But if I was to take that same amount of energy and put it very precisely on something like the size of a paperclip wire and go bang right on the skin, you might actually poke through the skin, right? Because it's just like that amount of that precision applied force. All the energy is going to that one spot. So when you're efficient with your force, you don't need as much of it. If you're wasting a bunch of energy though, because your technique's kind of weird or your fingers aren't putting all that force onto the fret, you might have to squeeze harder as you're figuring it out. And that's okay to start. Just make sure that you're mindful of how you can try and improve and get to a point where you're using the least amount of energy necessary. Okay? So 3rd fret to 8th fret. What you'll find as you start is just the mechanics of making the slide happen is tricky in itself, but what you're gonna struggle with is to get to the right fret. When I would start, you'd end up going, not enough, too much, not enough. And you'd go around the note that you're trying to actually get to. And what really helped me is realizing that a lot of sliding has to do with the intention of where you're going. So when I'm sliding from the 3rd fret here, I'm not looking at the 3rd fret because then I have to use my ears and my peripheral vision. But if I'm looking at the 8th fret, it's a lot easier to make my finger go straight there. Right? So you want to look where you're going in this case until you learn the feel and until you learn the sound and can do it without needing to look. What you want to do is be intentional on where you're going. So I'm thinking I'm on the 3rd fret. Once I'm there, I don't need to think about it anymore. But I'm looking at the 8th fret. Okay, 8th fret, 8th fret, 8th fret. And then when I play my slide, my finger comes into view and I can more precisely land the place that I want to land. You have to kind of think into the future and envision what's going to happen in this case. And if I go backwards, vice versa. I'm going to think about the 3rd fret and go right there. Because I'm looking at it, I'm intentionally thinking that's where I want my finger to land. And so that is where I end up. So try this out. Try sliding different amounts. Don't go big distances until you can go small distances. If going 2 frets is too much and you're getting lost, try just going 1 fret. Because the concept's the same whether you're going 1 fret or 2 frets. The difference is that when you go 1 fret on the ukulele, sound-wise, you're getting the same thing as a hammer-on. And a lot of times, a hammer-on is going to be a little bit easier to play. Depending on how your hand is positioned, you might want to just play the hammer-on instead of switching to the slide technique. Because you have to shift gears in and out of these different techniques. Some are going to align better with what you're trying to play and align with what you're trying to do in the music in the moment. And you have to be mindful of how technically you're going to execute something. If I need to articulate 1 fret, I'm not going to pick each one, but I want to articulate it and do some sort of a fancy movement where I only use 1 pick attack. I can hammer or I can slide. And depending on what's happening around this as I'm playing, I'm going to use one or the other in different situations. But as you're practicing slides, just go 1 fret if you need to and really get a feel for that. And that is going to serve you well as you build up to further and further distances. You can go 1 fret and then 2 frets and then 3 frets and then, just keep adding until you can move long distances and continue to keep them sounding musical the whole way through the slide. because that's what we're going for at the end of the day, is music. And if you're not going to use it, it doesn't really matter. So it's one of those things, if you can find a place in a song that will sound nice with a slide, a lot of times it's useful in imitating the voice. A lot of times the human voice will hit notes on the way by as it goes to the next note in a melody, and you can use the slide to approximate that. Because if you play a hammer-on, you know, like 2nd fret to 4th fret, it's very direct. You go from one to the next. But if you slide, you get that middle note as well sounding quickly. And a lot of times that's going to sound like the voice ramping up to the next note, as opposed to just going. That little pa in the middle of the slide can be a really nice effect, and it can help kind of maybe capture the melody better. But start simple, make sure you can get a solid connection with each fret as you move on by, and build up from there. Figure out ways to incorporate it into your music. And yeah, the slide will treat you well. Thanks for watching.